Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give people a minute or so to get in and get settled, and then we will get started. All right, we will get started. Thank you again for joining us today. Our webinar today is tips for keeping the social in social emotional learning. And our speaker is Angela Begres. This is the third of 4 staying connected with students and youth during the COVID-19 webinars. Our final webinar will be on May 3rd, and you can register for that on the Great Lakes MHTTC website if you have not already. This webinar is brought to you by MHTTC and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by SAMHSA through the following cooperative agreements. The opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official position of DHHS or SAMHSA. The MHTTC network believes that words matter. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of activities. Just some housekeeping details. If you're having any technical issues, please individually message Stephanie Bellman or Christina Spanbauer in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and they'll be happy to help you. If you have questions for the speaker, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them either during or at the end of the webinar. A copy of the PowerPoint slides, as well as the recording and a handout, will be available on the MHTTC website, and it takes us about 7 to 10 days to get that up there. You will be directed to a very short, or a link to a very short survey at the very end of this webinar. We would really appreciate it if you could take it. It takes about 3 minutes, and it's how we report back to SAMHSA. We will be using automated captioning during the presentation today. And finally, certificates of attendance will be sent out to all who attended the full session. They also will be sent out via email, and they can take about a week as well. If you would like to see what we are up to, feel free to follow us on social media. And again, Angela Begres is our presenter today. Angela is a licensed clinical social worker who did her training at the University of Chicago, where she obtained her MSW. She's an experienced trainer, presenter, contracted both independently and through various nonprofits in the Chicago area, Michigan, and other areas around. She also has experience integrating mental health education programs into the curriculum for students and staff within the Chicago and West Cook County public school systems. So thank you very much, Angela, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to have you all here today in this beautiful Monday. So I'm coming to you all from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit more about tips for keeping the social and social emotional learning. But before I get started, I kind of want to hear from all of you, maybe what is your role in the place that you work, in your organization, or where do you work? That would be really helpful as I move on through this presentation. So if you can just write that in the chat, I would really appreciate it. So this is the third presentation of this series. The last one, we're going to talk about keeping connections during the COVID era, which will be in May 3rd. So today I am going to be providing a lot of information about social emotional learning, the importance of it, and providing some tips for both parents, caregivers, and schools on how to utilize social emotional learning in their school system if they don't already. I see a lot of people sharing. There's some public health, there's Chicago Public Schools, some people from Project Hope. So a lot of different people from different places in the United States. So that's really exciting. Thank you all for sharing. So I'm gonna keep going and I'm gonna talk a little bit about our learning objectives for today. As I mentioned before, I will start by defining what is social emotional learning, also known as SEL. I will talk about the benefits of teaching with SEL, and then I will be able to provide some strategies to incorporate SEL in teaching, not only in teaching, but also as parents, even as social workers. I'm a mental health first aid therapist myself, and I utilize a lot of the social emotional learning techniques with a lot of the young clients that I see. So as usual, before I get started, I always want to make sure that we can all check in with ourselves and give us just a minute of mindfulness. So I want you all to just take a few minutes and take maybe one breath in and one breath out. And I want you to kind of feel your space, your area where you're at. Maybe check in with yourself. What are you feeling? How are you feeling this Monday? And if we can do anything to just sit here and be present and be able to stay present for the presentation. So always like to hear how people are feeling, especially on a Monday. So if you want to share with me, how are you feeling today? That would be great. I know I am feeling a little bit exhausted from the weekend, but I'm really excited to start my week. So if anyone else wants to share, I would be happy to hear that. I see some people saying they're tired. Thank you for sharing. So please feel free to share with us. It's so nice for us to be able to feel ourselves and check in with ourselves. As you all know, we need to take care of ourselves first before we can help others. There's a lot of things going on today in the world that I think has brought a lot of feelings over the weekend. And so I just want you all to please make sure that you're taking care of yourself as usual. Oh, some people have kids back in school. That's so exciting. Stressed, helping with friends. Well, thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's learn a little bit more about social emotional learning. So social emotional learning is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. Social emotional learning has been around for a very long time. However, it wasn't into the early 1990s that this organization developed social emotional learnings to be able to incorporate it in schools and educate not only students about social emotional learning, but even the adults that work with those students. I've learned about social emotional learning a couple of years ago, and it made so much sense to me. And I'm going to talk to you all a little bit more about the benefits of social emotional learning. So what research has shown around social emotional learning is that it improves academic achievement. So in schools where instructions include social emotional learning, students tend to have higher grades and also tend to get higher education, higher like college degrees. There's also decreased conduct problems and improves classrooms behaviors. It reduces depression and sadness, and it increases happiness, health, and emotional well-being. It also improves emotional literacy, self-management, and problem-solving skills. It tends to improve school climate, and it leads to healthy relationships and social skills. So the literature found that students benefit from learning social emotional learning for a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times per week. So what this is saying is that if we can incorporate social emotional skills for at least 20 to 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times per week, we're able to achieve the benefits listed on this slide. So there are 5 core competencies for social emotional learning. Basically, the idea is that we're able to improve or support young people in these 5 core competencies. So the first one is that through social emotional learning, we're supporting self-awareness. So we're helping students and youth recognize emotions and thoughts, understanding how they influence behavior, and assessing personal strengths and weaknesses. The next core competency is self-management. So regulating thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, setting goals, controlling impulses, and managing stress. Another competency is social awareness. So this is helping young people understand the perspective of others and also showing empathy for diverse groups of people, and finding supports through family, schools, and community relationships. So one of the most amazing things about utilizing social emotional learning is that we're also recognizing diversity groups, and we're including families and building partnerships with communities. And I will actually talk about this a little bit more throughout this course and this training. It also includes relationship skills. So being able to improve communication, cooperating, resisting negative pressure, and offering help. So ideally, through utilizing social emotional learning, we're able to build and maintain healthier relationships. And lastly, responsible decision making. So another goal is to help young people, youth, and students in making ethical and respectful choices about personal behavior and relationships, and evaluating the consequences of those decisions. So these are the goals that social emotional learning tries to implement when utilizing the skills with students, either in the classrooms or at home. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you all a very brief video that gives you some more information about what is SEL.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social-emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends, This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social-emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
Right. So thank you all for participating. So I have a question for all of you here. How many of you have heard of social emotional learning in the past? And I see someone that raised their hand. If you can write it in the chat, that would be cool. I see a lot of people raising their hands. So that's good. That's actually a good thing to use. Okay, so many of you are raising your hand. Awesome. That's really great. How many of you actually incorporate social emotional learning in your place of work, whether it's in school, therapy, or with youth that you've worked with in the past? Okay, great. That's amazing. We do at our school. That's really good. All right. I saw a lot of hands raising. Hadn't seen that in this webinar before, but I like people utilizing those tools. So thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to tell you and give you a little, oh, sorry, that was that. Give you some stats around social emotional learning. So in 2011, a meta-analysis with Castle, Casel, CASEL, that's the biggest organization that covers SEL learning, and they collaborated with other researchers to study SEL, social emotional learnings, with students from kindergarten to high school. They noticed a significant benefit from school-based universal social emotional learning interventions. So this meta-analysis that was the results were released in July 2017, evaluated results from nearly 97,500 students in 82 schools. And the effects were assessed 6 months to 18 years after the program had ended. The studies show that 3.5 years after their last social-emotional interventions, students fared markedly better academically than their peers in control groups by an average of 13%, based on 8 studies that measured academics. So what we're seeing is that students who participate in social emotional tend to do way better academically, and that's the increase was at 13%. They also noticed that students were 42% less likely to say they were involved in physical aggressions. And lastly, they noticed a 5 to 12% decrease in school dropout rates associated with social emotional learning. So a lot of my work is related to mental health, and social emotional learning in many areas is considered prevention, right? If we're able to educate students from kindergarten all the way to high school on how to manage their emotions, how to solve problems, how to step back and take some deep breaths and be able to think clearly, then this can do a lot of prevention work for more severe mental health illnesses, especially when it comes in connecting with others, making healthy relationships, making healthy decisions. And that is what social emotional learning has been doing over the past couple of years, is really trying to support young people so that they can grow up and be healthy emotionally. Again, a lot of the tools that young people learn through social emotional learning are taught to teachers and staff. And guess what? A lot of the research also shows that adults have taken in some of those tools, and it has shown some improvement in their own social emotional capacities. So let's talk about some strategies to incorporate social emotional learning. So like I said, research has shown that social and emotional competencies can be enhanced using a variety of classroom approaches, such as explicit instructions through which social and emotional skills and attitudes are taught and practiced in developmentally, contextually, and culturally responsive ways. We can also use teaching practices such as cooperative learning and project-based learning. And lastly, integrating of social emotional into academic curriculum, along with language arts, math, science, social studies, health, and performing arts. So there's a variety of ways in which schools and individuals can choose to incorporate social emotional learning. And I'm going to give you some specific tools, but there are a lot of websites and programs already developed to support schools into implementing social emotional learning into their school setting. And I will give you some resources of that at the end of the course. I also provided, I'm going to give you a list of books. So for all of us who are teachers, but also parents or caretakers, these are some ways that we can do our job as well in the house with our kids to support social emotional learning. One of the main goals of this is not only that we're incorporating some of these tools at home, but that is incorporated in the community. So incorporated with schools, with parents, and even with community settings in the young people's lives. So how schools can support social emotional learning. So the first thing, like I mentioned before, we want to investigate your school's efforts to support social emotional learning. It sounds like many of you have heard about social emotional learning. Many of you maybe are in a school system or in a place of work that has done some research around how to utilize it and what are the benefits of it. So if we are a teacher, or if we are a school social worker, and we haven't heard of that, that would be our first step, right? Just kind of contacting staff in our schools to ask them, have you heard of this? And is there anything that I can do to help bring this to our schools? And that goes with starting the discussion, really talking oftentimes through principles, maybe bringing in someone that talks about social emotional learning to do some professional development. These are some ways that we can start to spread the word around social emotional learning. Another way that we can support social emotional learning is by celebrating diversity. So this means working with other parents and school staff to organize programs and events to celebrate and honor the many cultures in your school community. So being mindful of culture is really important. And oftentimes I see a lot of teachers celebrating those diversities, but wouldn't it be nice to see the whole school system recognizing different cultures as a whole, and different diversity groups as a whole? That's a way of creating safety, enhancing support for students. As we know, if students feel safe, they're more likely to feel comfortable learning and more likely to do better academically. The next step is to get involved, right? If this is something that's already within your school, ask how you can get involved. How can you support the school? Maybe you can bring in some research. Maybe you can bring in some skills that you've learned in the past. Maybe you can connect with other school systems that are also using SEL and maybe develop a support group or some connections to share resources and support for one another. And lastly, and most important, is utilizing professional development. So bringing experts in the field to help educators, to educate teachers, to help educators learn what the supports for SEL are in the school system and how to incorporate it within the school system as well. And again, all schools are different. And so many of them would be willing to bring this in as a whole for the whole school system, for the whole school. Other schools might go step by step and maybe do just bringing in for a couple of courses, see how it works, see how they can implement it. So the best thing to do is to get started with that discussion and getting support from your peers. Also, as I mentioned before, parents have a big goal in making social emotional learning successful, right? And so some ways that they can support the strategies for social emotional learning is by being a good listener, right? We all could do better at being good listeners, but especially when we're supporting youth, we want to make sure that when a young person, our kid, our son or daughter comes to us to talk about something, that we have the space and time to sit and listen to them. Sometimes listening does not mean that we have to solve a problem. It just means that the young person just wants to share something with us and wants someone to just validate. So being mindful of that, right? Knowing that being a good listener does not always mean we have to solve their problem. They just need to talk to us. Model the behavior you seek. I think this is really important, right? Sometimes we're trying to teach our youth something and we forget to model that ourselves. So being mindful of that, whether it is apologizing when you're in the wrong or treating others with respect and kindness, children learn a great deal about relationships from observing the behaviors of their parents. So being mindful, I was just driving with my kid in my back seat, and I remember I got upset at a car and I was yelling, and all of a sudden I hear my kid yelling in the back as well. So remember, young people are little sponges and they observe everything and notice everything. And so being mindful on how we behave in front of them, and when we make mistakes, acknowledging that, you know, everyone makes mistakes, even your parents, even adults, even our teachers, right? Anyone can make a mistake. Nurture your child's self-esteem. A child with a good sense of self-esteem is happier, more well-adjusted, and does better in school. Strategies for fostering self-esteem includes giving your child responsibilities, allowing them to make age-appropriate choices, and showing your appreciation for a job well done. And I want to highlight choices here because I think choices are really important when we're nurturing a child's self-esteem. Young people always want to have a sense of control over their decisions. So I often like to call these choices with limits. So depending on the young person's age, you know, maybe we allow them to choose which vegetable they eat or what color shirt they wear. Maybe instead of opening the drawer and asking them to pick out of, you know, 10 or 20 shirts, maybe bringing out 2 shirts and being like, do you want this yellow or do you want this purple shirt? So being mindful and trying to give young people as many choices as you can really enhance self-esteem. We also want to respect differences. Every child has his or her own unique talents and abilities, whether it is academics, athletics, or interpersonal relationships. It's important for us to resist the urge to compare our children to their friends or siblings. Instead, honor your child's accomplishments and provide support and encouragement for the challenges he faces. So again, we want to just make sure that we're honoring our youth for whatever talents that they do or might have. And that's really important. Sometimes we forget that each of our kids are different, even if we had 2 kids really close to each other. Each of them have different temperaments, different personalities, different likes, and we want to be mindful of that. And take advantage of support services. A lot of communities, and I always tell this to students when I go into the schools, students have a system. They work within a system. They have teachers who support them. They have school counselors, school staff that support them, and they have parents and caregivers that support them. So let's take advantage of those support systems and utilize them. If we're struggling with supporting our youth, let's connect with teachers. Let's connect with others in the groups as well. Maybe that is the school social worker. Maybe that is a therapist in our area. So being mindful and being careful to use those services. Other ways that we can connect with schools and work together. And this is really important, right? We can utilize social emotional skills in the home, but we also want to work alongside with the school. And this, I think, is one of the areas that help students who utilize or who systems who utilize social emotional learning that help students be successful academically, right? So we are working together to value learning. And how do we do that? Well, we know that the school has a way in which kids have learned, and they have tests and they have projects that they need to complete. But at home, we also want to value learning. That means making sure that we create a routine around learning. And we have to remind ourselves that, you know, this era of COVID-19, this has been really difficult. Learning looks different for everyone. Sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours. One of my students told me yesterday, my parents, you know, they get mad at me if I spend like 8 hours playing at video games, but they're not mad at me because I'm 8 hours on my computer doing school. So, and it's true, I couldn't argue that, right? Like they are spending so much time on their computers with school, with trying to learn, trying to utilize their ability to learn new subjects, new skills, at the same time sitting down pretty independently at home, which is not how school is supposed to be done. So being great, providing some grace to our youth as teachers and as parents and as caregivers, but also continuing to talk about the importance of learning, right? We learn because we want to be important. We want to contribute to our world and to our society. We learn because we want you to be able to learn new skills and be able to have a job that you enjoy, right? It gives you opportunities. So we want to make sure that we explain to young people why we value learning and why learning is important. Create a positive learning environment at home. And I'm sure that all of you have already done this because we've been doing COVID for the last year, but making sure that we have a separate space for school, if possible, outside of the bedroom. I know that's not possible for everyone, but that could be really helpful in really creating an area where young people can feel comfortable learning. I talked to a lot of parents and I told them, create a little basket of like fidgeting tools, whether that is fidget spinning, pipe cleaners, different things that they can utilize with their hands so that it helps them resist the urge to go into their computers and research and do other things that are outside the learning capacities. Listen when your child talks about school. So as parents, if our kid comes home and wants to talk to us about school, we want to be able to listen. And again, I want to highlight the fact that this is listen, not problem solve. Just listen to what's going on for them, even if this is really difficult. I don't want to sit here for 8 hours. We can validate that. You're right. That is really hard. We would like for you to be in the classroom as well, but we want to make sure that everyone is safe. So just being able to listen and validate. Help your child with homework. And again, we're helping our children with homework. We want them to be able to learn what they're are being taught in school, but it's not our job for them to get it right all the time, right? That's why it's homework. It's for them to practice what they're learning in school. It's okay to make mistakes. So giving your young people the opportunity to make those mistakes in homework and not taking responsibility as parents sometimes to make sure that everything they do with their homework is correct. Take advantage of school meetings, especially now. We want to make sure that we are keeping up with school meetings, making sure that we know what's happening, what are some of the protocols. As you might know, depending on where you're at in the United States right now, things are changing like day to day, week to week. So we want to make sure that we are able to take advantage of school meetings if we have the time. Volunteer at school if possible, even if it's once a year. It's a great way to get to know your teachers, to make some important connections, to be able to know what your kid does at school and who their friends are. So it could be really helpful to volunteer at school and attend school activities. If your child is in any school activities and you have the time and the capacity, it's really important that you attend those, because that shows your youth that you're there and you're prioritizing them, but also shows the school and sends the same message. Right, so like I said before, social emotional learning should be prioritized during COVID-19. Everything is different right now, and I know that we're all really trying to make things as normal as we can, and as giving each other grace, because this has been a hard time, not only with COVID-19, but with a lot of other things happening in the world. So we want to make sure that we continue to prioritize social emotional learning at this time. And I feel like if you've attended any of my other presentations, I've said this before, but the main thing when we're trying to keep social emotional learning is schedule. For our youth, schedule is really important. For us as adults, schedule is really important. So as teachers, schedule regular check-ins with students and their families. When possible, once a week, every other week, just checking in with parents is really helpful. I would even highlight, do a regular check-in if you have some students that you're more concerned about, right? This will help you get a more clear insight of what's going on in the house. Teach strategies for organization, planning, and self-regulation. So it can be helpful to talk about skills that we can keep ourselves organized, skills for us to plan our days or our weekends or our time off, and also how to use self-regulation, whether that means we need to take a couple of deep breaths, whether that means we need to do a short walk. How can we self-regulate? Sometimes we can do that even with students that like are always wanting to raise their hand and talk first, right? And taking away the opportunity for other students to participate. That's a great time to help young people develop the skill of self-regulation, having them maybe talking to them independently and being like, hey, I'm gonna need you to raise your hand and when you need to participate, know that I might not always choose you because I want all of your peers to be able to also participate. But just letting them know that you still notice them. That's really helpful. Read and discuss current events, right? If students are starting to come back into the school, really help them understand what are the safeties around the school. How are we maintaining safety in the school? How are we going to be able to socialize and connect? So really making sure that we're discussing and being truthful and honest to youth. Oftentimes we might not always give all the information because we don't want young people to worry or stress out, but young people can sense and they recognize when things are different. So the more we can be honest and truthful with them, the better it is. Assign a project that encourages students to be the helpers. So those projects can be things like giving them an assignment where they're each cooperating in a different part of the assignment, maybe doing something at home individually and then coming together and helping each other, putting those things to that project together. Maybe that means we can provide students the opportunity to help us in the classroom in some aspects. Maybe one student helps by reading the quote of the day. Other student helps by leading a discussion on a breakout room if we're still doing online classes, right? And if we're in the classroom, we're gonna have to really rethink this because we no longer can have students going around hanging out papers. And so thinking about how can we still incorporate young people in assisting us and helping us is really important. And then share stress reduction and mindfulness strategies. You might notice that I start my webinars with just a minute of mindfulness. Let's just breathe. Let's just notice ourselves. Let's notice our body. So if we can do a minute, 30 seconds of mindfulness, that can be really helpful. The nice thing about mindfulness is that it brings oxygen into our brain. It releases the toxins that are there, and it helps us kind of change our mood and make it more positive. So at any time, if you can incorporate any level of mindfulness into your classrooms, that can make a big difference. Oftentimes, if we can model it as a teacher, if we can model it as a parent, it's easier for the young person to follow through with it as well. There are also some other ways that we can integrate social emotional learning, mostly into the classroom, right? So things like doing a daily greeting. Daily greetings can be very short or they can be as long as you want, right? But kids and young people need to feel connected. That is the one thing that so many of the youth I work with feel like they're lacking. They're not feeling connections. So how can we make this a positive place where we can make connections with our youth, even if we're still virtually? Some strategies that I learned about is having some strategies to start your morning daily with daily greetings. So that could be like daily high fives virtually, daily air high fives if in person. That could mean like writing an affirmation quote either in a slide or in the board when in the morning. But thinking about how do we create a routine about daily check-ins, and depending on the grade, that might look differently as well. Incorporating art activities. As you might know, art is very much a powerful way to target social and emotional skills. So this can be creating a self-collage, which can help kids develop better self-awareness about who they are. So that can be a project that we can do at the beginning of the school year to get to know each other. Maybe creating a self-collage of what's happened in your life or your favorite things, or what are some of your goals, and having young people share that. I think that would be a really nice way to get to know each other. Talk about managing emotions. All kids and young adults need practicing managing their emotions. Be open with kids about how to manage their own emotions and give strategies for what they can do in the classroom or at home. For example, if you're feeling nervous about a test today, remember to use positive self-talk. Tell yourself, you've got this. So again, we want to help young people manage those emotions. I always tell students, oftentimes we like to feel happy, enjoy all the time, but unfortunately that's not how emotions always work. Sometimes we get angry, sometimes we feel upset, and all of those emotions are appropriate because that's what our body feels, and that's our body sending us a message that something's going on. So having emotions is okay. How we respond to those emotions is what sometimes we need to think about and we need to improve. So helping young people understand that. So if someone's nervous for a test, we might validate, like, I can see why sometimes tests can be nervous, but you've got this. Let's talk about what are some things you can do to make sure that you feel prepared for that test. And again, always trying to give them the ability to practice problem solving skills. How would you handle that really inappropriately? What would be some better ways to handle that in the future? So really helping young people practice problem solving skills. It's such an important skill to develop. And oftentimes we tend to help them solve their problems, and then therefore we're not allowing them to develop the skill on their own. It's also important to give students responsibility. So in the classroom, what would be their responsibilities? Maybe the responsibility is you have to submit your homework at the beginning of the classroom, or your responsibility to maybe answer a couple of surveys. So just making sure that we talk about those responsibilities beforehand, right? So here's what we expect of you. I'm sure all of you have classroom rules, and having those available for them to notice and see as frequently as possible. Build community with teamwork. So again, being able to create groups and teamwork with youth. I would always encourage individuals to switch those groups around so that students get to know everyone in the classroom and make new friendships and connections. Encourage positive self-talk. Language is powerful. Language has the power to change, but it also has the power to hurt. So we want to make sure that we help young people utilize the positive self-talk. I can do this. I am capable. I'm going to give myself grace. I made a mistake, right? Just making sure that we're utilizing some positive self-talk so that we're not talking down on ourselves, because that's usually what happens. Even as adults, I think we oftentimes tend to be really harsh to ourselves. And I sometimes talk to young people, and I will provide an example. If you were telling me this story, if I was telling you this story about how I made a mistake, how would you respond to me? And oftentimes the response is like, well, I'll tell you, it's okay, you made a mistake. Maybe you can try differently next time. But then when we're saying that to ourselves, when we're talking to ourselves about a situation, we tend to be really negative. Oh, I'm not capable. I'm not smart enough. No one cares. So just helping young people recognize the importance of being positive or talking kindly to themselves, just like they would to like their best friend or to just a friend. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of creating a calm down area. This can be really useful in a school. Some school social workers have this already. This can also be useful at home. And a calm down area is a very simple space where you have some comfortable things. It could be a chair, it can be a beanie bag, it can be a comfortable rug, and then some comforting things like a blanket, some stuffed animals, and a place for young people to maybe have some alone time to calm down. Like I said before, encouraging kindness. One nice thing I saw when I was researching for this webinar is some teachers have done a thing where they create a box and ask young people to kind of catch their peers being kind and writing a message in the box. And then at the end of the week, kind of reading those messages to the students. And, that kind of promotes kindness. So if you hear that I did something kindly, you're more likely to want to be kind to other people, and it kind of becomes a chain. So that can be a really helpful way to do that. We can incorporate messages of kindness in the classroom. We can create this box and the students get to put in a message anytime they feel like someone in the classroom did something kind. And this is a good way of teaching kindness to students. Provide a daily check-in. This can be daily, or this can be weekly, or this can be specific to maybe students that you're more concerned about. And just kind of, if possible, a 3 to 5 minute check-in. Hey, how are you doing? There was a research done about doing daily check-ins in person back when I worked in Chicago, and it just showed that it improved the young person's behavior because someone was there and noticed them and say like, hey, how are you doing today? So don't underestimate the power of just noticing and checking in on a student. Discuss empathy, being able to explain that we want to make sure that we're kind to others. And maybe when something is not very empathetic, discussing how that can hurt someone's feelings. And highlight skills throughout the day, right? Oftentimes we are trying to discipline students and teach them respect. But when we focus on all of the negatives, right, then we don't have time to focus on the positives. So if we're noticing young people do positive things or utilize any of the things we've talked about, if kids are being kind, if kids are being empathetic, if kids are working in teamwork, let's highlight that. Hey, good job for doing that. Thank you for supporting the class today. Thank you for leading that discussion. Just noticing young people is really important. Some of the research that comes out of supporting youth with ADHD is that we want to use positive statements more often than negative statements. And I think that that is effective for anyone. I know that for myself, I respond much better if you tell me something positive as opposed to tell me something negative, right? So if we can catch young people doing things well, then we want to make sure that we highlight those so that they understand that's what we're looking for. Social emotional learning by grade. So there are different ways that we can incorporate social emotional learning. If we start with elementary school, it can be something as simple as having guided discussions, reading books, and providing problem-solving opportunities. This can teach skills. This can teach social skills and appropriate classroom behavior. One thing I would say is that sometimes it could be helpful to just allow youth to solve their own problems. So if you have students that maybe are in elementary school, I don't know how often this happens in middle school or high school that we can get involved, but in elementary school, if we notice that young people are struggling maybe with sharing something or with a team project, maybe it's saying like, hey, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to try to solve this problem on your own. I would be happy to help you, but I just want you together to come up with an idea of how we can solve this, and giving them maybe 10 minutes and then coming back and supporting them if they need it. Again, just by doing that, we are empowering young people to be able to make the right decisions, and we're teaching them a very important skill. We can support social emotional learning in middle school by providing, right, social opportunities. It's middle school where young people tend to start understanding and start to find connections with peers and finding what they are interested in. And so if we can support those social dynamics and help and discuss healthy relationships and stress management, this can be really important at this time for students. I know that there was a lot of times where I would go into schools and talk to young people about stress management. As we know, middle school tends to be a big shift for students when it comes to grades being a little bit more impactful. And then a lot of relationship challenges. And so focusing on that can be really helpful. And then in high school, it is best if we can provide social emotional skills through subject specific strategies. So incorporating some of these skills in math and English and social studies and different areas where they can learn how to utilize them. As we know, in high school, students are going from class to class. So being able to do it within the different subjects could be really helpful. And what we want to focus in high school is on developing strategies to manage stress and prepare for life after school. And this can include social strategies as well as problem-solving strategies and stress management. Now, as you might know, a lot of the stress management that I would recommend is talking about mindfulness and how to manage feelings and good stress versus bad stress, right? Because there's some stress that's really helpful. The stress that pushes us to prepare for a test, the stress that pushes us to, prepare for a presentation, those can be really helpful stresses. Whereas there could be other stresses that can be really negative. And so we want to be able to help young people recognize that just because we feel stressed, that doesn't mean it's always bad, but when it does become a little bit more impactful, there are different skills we can utilize for that. So here's some final thoughts on social emotional learning. If you haven't already utilized this in your schools, it is important that when you're talking about implementing social emotional learning, that the programs that you're researching are backed by research. And like I said before, Castle, and I'm going to give you the website in a minute, that is the main website for social emotional learning, and they have a lot of resources around this. Some schools, again, choose to bring in a full program. Others choose to educate their teachers and give them some tools that they can utilize in their classrooms. As long as we're utilizing some of these skills, right, we're still supporting youth emotionally. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of the research that is coming on right now, but we know that a lot of youth are struggling with their mental health because of COVID. And we want to be able to give them some grace as they come back to school and need to kind of catch up and do well with grades, because not only are young people struggling mentally, but a lot of us have experienced trauma due to COVID-19. And if we're not targeting or supporting youth mental health, then any academics is not going to be beneficial. And so as educators and as parents and as professionals, we always want to be mindful of that we're supporting youth mental health as well when we are trying to educate them. And by that, I don't mean you have to support them by treating their mental health, but noticing it and providing them resources and helping them recognize their emotions. It's also important to empower and equip teachers. Teachers, as well as all of us, are coming in with the same stressors. And so we want to make sure that everyone, as teachers, school staff, school administrators, are also being mindful of everyone's mental health and supporting each other throughout that process. As you can imagine, it's been a very stressful year for a lot of teachers and students. And don't be afraid to make adjustments if things aren't working out. If one program or some techniques aren't working, don't be afraid to change it or look for different resources. I try to provide a lot of books around social emotional learning, and I went through my list and did some research, and these are some of the books that are recommended. We have The Color Monster, a story about emotions. And I put the age groups here as well. Some of this you can actually find like in YouTube. Someone will read them. So that could be a good activity to do for a classroom. The Grumpy Monkey is a really good one that talks about mood. I just like you. Two of my favorites are Breathe Like a Bear, and this provides 30 mindfulness moments for kids to feel calm and focused anytime, anywhere. So it's really nice. It has like different pages, provide different mindfulness activities. Some of them is like blow candles, breathe like a bear, and it's just a really good strategy for kids. If you want to create a calm down corner, that's a good book to have there. The book Be Kind is a lovely book about a girl who talks about the different things we can do to be kind. One of my very favorite books. And then The Whole Brain Child is for parents or adults who want to just learn a little bit more about how the child's brain develops. And I think that ties really closely to social emotional learning as well. Here's some resources. If you need some support, the resources are here and available for you. And like I said, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, this is the website where you can get so much more information around social and emotional learning, as well as all of the research behind it. We have some more additional resources. I'm always available if anyone needs to ask any questions. And I'm also available for any questions now if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Angela. Again, incredibly useful and helpful information for everyone, parents, teachers, anyone who's trying to work with kids. We don't have any questions at the moment. I just want to remind everyone that, again, a copy of the recording, the PowerPoint slides, and a couple of handouts that Angela talked about will be available on our website in about a week. So you can get it all there and download it. Again, let's see, we have, someone said, what are some resources for adult learning? Sorry, thanks, Tammy. What are some resources for adult learning?
So I think the best way to start is to start with the CASEL website and reading through some of their research. A lot of my resources are also on my PowerPoint, and you can read through a lot of that information.
Great, thank you. That was it.
All right.
So again, I want to thank everybody for their time this afternoon, especially Angela, and we will see you again May 3rd for our final in this 4-part series. So everyone have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon.